When we ask the question, what is the mind? We're actually asking one of the oldest, deepest questions human beings have ever wrestled with. Every culture, every tradition, every scientist, every philosopher has tried to put their finger on it. And in some ways, the question is simple, because we all have a mind, we all experience it every single day. But in another way, it's slippery, because the mind is not a thing you can point to. You can point to the brain, sure. You can point to neurons firing, chemical signals moving. But the mind itself, thoughts, feelings, awareness, imagination, memory, you can't hold those in your hand. So what is it really? For most of us, the mind is just the water we swim in. We wake up in the morning and it's already going. You open your eyes and there's a thought, I'm tired. There's a feeling, I don't want to go to work. There's an impulse, hit snooze. Your mind is there before you even fully realize you're awake. And throughout the day, it's this constant stream of chatter, judgments, images, flashes, urges. Sometimes helpful, sometimes neutral, sometimes cruel. And most of us don't really stop to ask, what is this thing that's running my life? We just live inside it. But when we really stop to look, we notice something interesting. The mind is not just thoughts. It's also awareness of those thoughts. If I ask you to notice what you're thinking right now, there's a part of you that can actually step back and observe. That's important because it means the mind isn't just one thing. It's not just the content, the memories, the emotions, the stories. It's also the container, the awareness that can hold all of those experiences. And that's where things start to get tricky. Because if the mind has both content and awareness, then what is the mind really? Is it the thoughts themselves, or is it the thing that notices them? Is it the flow, or is it the witness? This is where traditions differ. Western psychology, for example, tends to define the mind as a collection of cognitive processes: perception, attention, memory, reasoning, emotion. It's like a machine that takes in information, processes it, and spits out behavior. In contrast, a lot of Eastern traditions see the mind as something deeper, a field of awareness in which thoughts and feelings arise and pass. They don't see the mind as a machine, but as a space, and maybe both are true. Because when you look at the mind in real life, you can see both sides. On one hand, it clearly functions. Your mind remembers your friend's birthday. It solves a math problem and navigates traffic. That's the machine-like side. But on the other hand, your mind also dreams. It imagines things that have never existed. It watches itself. It asks questions like, who am I? That's not just a machine. That's something harder to pin down. And the reason this question matters is because how you define the mind shapes how you relate to it. If you see your mind as just a machine, then when it malfunctions, you think you're broken. If you see your mind as a space, then when something arises, like anxiety or anger, you realize it's not the whole of you. It's just something passing through. So the definition isn't just abstract. It affects how you live. Now, if you really want to understand what the mind is, you have to look at its layers. Because the mind is not one flat thing, it has depth. There are the surface layers, which are easy to notice: thoughts, words, images. Then there are deeper layers: emotions, instincts, unconscious beliefs. And even deeper still, there are patterns that you may not even be aware of, like your attachment style, your implicit memories from childhood, the ways your nervous system learned to respond to stress. All of that is part of your mind too. So when we ask, what is the mind? We're not asking about one object. We're asking about an ecosystem. Imagine a forest. On the surface, you see trees, plants, animals. That's like your conscious thoughts. But beneath the soil, there are roots, fungi, microorganisms, an entire hidden world shaping what grows above. That's your unconscious. And just like a forest, your mind is constantly changing. Trees fall, new plants grow, seasons shift. Your thoughts come and go, your moods rise and fall, memories fade and return. The mind is not static. It's alive. One of the biggest mistakes people make is thinking the mind is who they are. I think, therefore I am. That's the famous line from Descartes. But if you look closely, is that true? If your mind produces a thought like, I'm worthless, does that make you worthless? If your mind produces an anxious spiral, does that mean you are anxiety? Probably not. Because there's a part of you that can recognize, I'm having an anxious thought right now. That awareness is separate from the thought itself. Which means your mind is not your identity. It's a tool, a space, a process. And you are more than that. But most of us don't live that way. Most of us fuse with our minds. When a thought arises, we believe it. When a feeling arises, we become it. If the mind says, everyone is judging you, we walk into the party anxious. If the mind says, you're not good enough, we stop trying. If the mind says, this will never work out, we give up. In that sense, the mind can be like a tyrant. It runs the show. And because we rarely question what the mind actually is, we get stuck obeying it. This is why meditation has been such a powerful practice across cultures. Not because it makes your mind blank, but because it shows you what your mind really is. Sit down, close your eyes, and try to focus on your breath. Within seconds, thoughts appear. This is boring. I'm hungry. Am I doing this right? You start to see how your mind is constantly generating content. And if you keep practicing, you start to notice, I don't have to follow every thought. I can just watch it, like clouds passing in the sky. That's when you begin to realize, maybe my mind is not me. Maybe my mind is something happening in me. From a neuroscience perspective, the mind is an emergent property of the brain. Neurons fire, chemicals flow, networks activate, and somehow, out of that, consciousness arises. But notice, neuroscience can describe the mechanisms, but it still can't fully explain the mystery. How does firing in the visual cortex create the actual experience of seeing the color red? How does electrical activity translate into the feeling of sadness? This is what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. Science can tell us what parts of the brain light up, but it can't tell us why there's an inner experience at all. That's the riddle of the mind. And this is where I think humility is important, because the truth is no one really knows what the mind is. We have models, we have metaphors, we have brain scans. But the lived reality of the mind, what it feels like to be you inside your own awareness, is something that escapes measurement. It's something you have to explore directly. That's why I often encourage people to get curious about their own minds. Instead of asking me or science or philosophy to define it for you, try investigating it yourself. Pay attention to how your thoughts arise. Do they appear on command, or do they just pop up? Pay attention to your emotions. Where do they start in the body? How do they shift over time? Notice your patterns. What does your mind do when it's bored? When it's afraid? When it's in love? By observing, you begin to map your own mind. And in doing so, you start to understand it not just as a concept, but as a living process. And the more you understand, the less trapped you are. Because when you see your mind clearly, you realize you don't have to believe every thought. You don't have to resist every emotion. You don't have to identify with every story. You can hold it all more lightly, and that changes everything. When we start talking about the mind, one of the most important questions that always comes up is, where does it come from? Is the mind something you're born with, or is it something that develops over time? Neuroscience will tell us that you reborn with a brain, a biological organ with immense potential, but the actual shape of your mind is sculpted by experience. From the moment you enter the world, your nervous system is taking in information, building patterns, wiring connections. Your first cry, your mother's touch, the way your father held you, whether someone responded to your needs or left you alone to cry, all of these things start to shape your mind. And here's the fascinating part. It's not just your conscious memories that matter. In fact, the deepest shaping of the mind often happens before you can even form explicit memory. Think about it. You don't remember being 6 months old, but your nervous system does. If every time you cried, someone came and soothed you, your mind started building an implicit belief. The world is safe. My needs will be met. People can be trusted. If you were left alone too often or comfort was inconsistent, your mind started building a different template. I can't rely on others. I have to manage alone. The world is unpredictable. These implicit memories form the foundation of attachment, which is really just another way of talking about how the mind relates to itself and to others. So, in a very real way, your mind is not just yours. It's a collective project shaped by your caregivers, your culture, your environment. And that's where a lot of people misunderstand themselves. They think, my mind is broken, I'm anxious, I can't focus, I'm depressed. What's wrong with me? But often, what they're calling broken is really just the logical outcome of their history. Their mind adapted to survive in the environment they were born into. If you grew up in a household where anger was dangerous, your mind learned to scan constantly for signs of tension. If you grew up where love was conditional, your mind learned to hustle for approval. Those patterns aren't random glitches, they're survival strategies. They made sense back then. They just don't always serve you now. And this is where the paradox of the mind really comes in. The very same patterns that protect you also imprison you. The hypervigilance that kept you safe as a child becomes the anxiety that robs you of peace as an adult. The self-sufficiency that helped you survive neglect becomes the loneliness that keeps you from connection. The perfectionism that once earned approval becomes the burnout that drains your joy. The mind is brilliant in this way. It will do whatever it takes to protect you, but the cost is that it can trap you in loops. That's why so much of therapy, meditation, or even just personal growth is about becoming aware of those loops. The mind operates like a program running in the background. You don't even notice it until you pause and ask, why do I always react this way? Why do I shut down when someone criticizes me? Why do I procrastinate on things that matter to me? When you start pulling on those threads, you begin to see the architecture of your own mind. And that's the key. You can't change what you don't see, but let's dig a little deeper. Because the mind is not just shaped by your personal history. It's also shaped by your biology. Some people are more naturally anxious because their amygdala, the brain's fear center, is more reactive. Some people are more prone to depression because their reward pathways don't fire as strongly. Some people have ADHD because their dopamine system struggles with sustaining attention. So when we talk about the mind, we're not just talking about thoughts and beliefs. We're talking about biology, chemistry, wiring. And here's where things get really interesting. Because your biology and your experiences are constantly shaping each other. Trauma changes your brain. Meditation changes your brain. Relationships change your brain. Even the way you think can physically rewire your brain. That's neuroplasticity. So when we say mind, we're really talking about this dynamic dance between brain and experience, nature and nurture, hardware and software. But notice something. Even though all of this is incredibly complex, there's still something simple about your direct experience of mind. Right now, you can close your eyes and just notice. Thoughts are happening. Feelings are happening. Sensations are happening. That raw experience is the most basic definition of mind. Whatever is showing up in awareness, you don't need a PhD to experience it. You're already in it. And sometimes that direct awareness tells you things that theory can't. For example, if you've ever had a panic attack, you know that in the moment, your mind feels completely hijacked. Your heart races, your chest tightens, your thoughts spiral into catastrophe. And yet, if you can find even the tiniest sliver of awareness, okay, I'm having a panic attack. This is my mind going into overdrive. That awareness itself creates a crack in the experience. It doesn't erase the panic, but it changes your relationship to it. Suddenly, you're not just drowning in the panic. You're also the one noticing it. And that noticing is powerful because it shows you that your mind, while overwhelming, is not all of you. And this is where traditions like Buddhism have been really wise. They say, the mind is like the sky. Thoughts and emotions are like clouds. Some days the sky is clear, some days it's stormy, but the sky itself is always there, untouched. If you identify with the clouds, your life will feel chaotic. But if you remember you are the sky, the awareness that holds it all, then even the storms have space. That doesn't mean you stop having thoughts or feelings. It means you stop confusing them for your whole being. Now, I know for some people that can feel abstract. They'll say, okay, nice metaphor, but what does that actually mean for me? Here's what it means. Your mind will always produce content. You can't stop it. That's not a bug. That's what minds do. But you don't have to treat every piece of content as truth. You don't have to obey every impulse. You don't have to fuse with every emotion. When you start to create distance, you start to create freedom. Think about rumination. Your mind replays a mistake over and over. Why did I say that? I'm such an idiot. Everyone thinks I'm weird. The more you engage with it, the deeper the spiral. But if you can catch yourself and say, my mind is ruminating right now, suddenly you're not inside the loop anymore. You're outside watching the loop. And from there, you have a choice. Do I want to keep feeding this loop, or do I want to redirect my attention? That shift from I'm my mind to I'm noticing my mind is one of the most profound transformations you can make. And here's something else. The mind is not just individual. It's also collective. The thoughts you think are not purely your own. They're shaped by the culture you live in. If you grew up in a society that says success means making lots of money, your mind will naturally produce thoughts like, I'm failing unless I'm rich. If you grew up in a culture that values family above all, your mind will produce guilt when you prioritize your own needs. In that sense, your mind is like a sponge, soaking up the values around you. And often, we don't realize that. We think our thoughts are personal truths, when in fact they're cultural programs. This is why questioning your mind is so important. Not every thought deserves your obedience. Some thoughts are just echoes of your upbringing. Some are defenses you built in childhood. Some are cultural scripts you never chose. And when you start to see that, you can begin to ask, do I want to keep this thought? Does this belief serve me? That's the real work of growth. Not getting rid of your mind, but learning to relate to it consciously. And maybe the most beautiful thing is that the mind can change. No matter how rigid your patterns feel, they're not permanent. The anxious mind can learn safety. The traumatized mind can learn healing. The distracted mind can learn focus. The self-critical mind can learn compassion. It takes work, it takes time, but the mind is plastic. It bends, it adapts, it grows. That's what makes us human. So when we ask, what is the mind? Maybe the best answer is this. The mind is the space where your biology, your history, your culture, and your awareness all meet. It's not a single thing you can pin down. It's a process, a field, a flow. And you are both within it and beyond it.